afternoon, and thanks for being here with us today. We're pleased to have you. Today, I'd like to announce our sponsor for this event, and that is White Capital Management. Warren White, who's the vice president of that firm, is here. I'd like to present him with a certificate of appreciation. School District in the high school, and Rick Barton, who's our presenter today, gave a wonderful Q&A period with students who came prepared and asked him questions that they had created. So we had a really terrific session. Ambassador Barton teaches at Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton University, where he serves as co-director of Princeton Scholars in Nation Service Initiatives and Ullman Fellowships. His book, which we'll have for sale later today, is Peace Works: America's Unifying Role in a Turbulent World. It uses a mix of stories, history, and analysis to offer an affirmative approach to foreign affairs through concrete and attainable solutions. And we'll talk about some of those as I interview Ambassador Barton today. He started out as USAID's Office of Transition Initiatives and was America's ambassador to the Economic and Social Council of the United Nations in New York, the UN Deputy High Commissioner for Refugees in Geneva, and the first American Secretary of State for Conflict and Stabilization Operations. He comes to us with a wealth of stories and great successes and failures of our international affairs, all of which we'll discuss. Rick, would you join me up on the podium? Yeah, we are going to have our audience, if you have cards on your table, if you would use those to write down questions, we'll be collecting those after we ask some initial questions of Rick. So Rick, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for doing the radio show on WEEU the other day. That was greatly enjoyed by the Reading area. So I have a first question for you.
Make it louder, please.
Where's my mic? Does that help?
Yeah.
Can you hear?
Can you hear me okay as well? No, not yet.
Further up?
See, I can't get this much closer. I think I'll just turn up the volume. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, just keep telling me because I'm deaf as well.
So here's our first question. Why did you write Peace Works? And how do we need to work with countries around the world? What are you trying to accomplish?
Can't hear you.
You get our sound guy.
It's working. It's right here.
I will repeat the question, and now you can hear it. Now I can hear it. Okay. So here's the first question. Why did you write the book, Peace Works, and about how we need to work with countries around the world? What were you trying to accomplish?
Well, first off, thank you, Lynn. It's a real pleasure to be here. I wrote the book so I'd have an excuse to come to Reading. and really talk to people who are concerned American citizens who want to see the United States do a better job of taking its really special advantaged position in this world and make the world more peaceful. We've made major efforts at this, not just in the world wars, but throughout our history, our more modern history. And we know we could do the job better in many, many ways, right from the selection of the places that we get involved in to what we do there. And I just thought that if we could mobilize the American public to recognize how influential they are in these places and in the decisions that our government makes, that we would make better choices. The United States has been involved in almost 20 wars since the major wars, and we have not gone through the congressional processes of getting approval. We don't ever have our taxes raised to fight in these wars, and very few of us now have members of our family that serve in the military. So our traditional connection to the important matters has been diminished. And the only way that we will really do this with, I think, the full ingenuity of the American people and the American public is if we know more, we are informed, we are engaged, and we let our elected officials know how important it is to us that we do the best job possible. So that's kind of a long description, but it's really a pleasure to have all these students here, to have concerned citizens, and to have the World Affairs Council be the host. So thank you for the invitation and for your being part of this event today.
Great. The book has a half-dozen cases. They're in Bosnia, Rwanda, Haiti, Afghanistan, Iraq, and Syria. Where did things work out where local forces rather than a top-down American involvement really saved lives?
Well, not enough places, but to some for a variety of reasons. Many times they've been beaten down, and in other cases the international intervention may have been too strong and too total, too complete, to then therefore not leave the room for the locals to really have the responsibility that I feel they need to have. You could look at Rwanda. It's hard to claim that a genocide where 1 million people were killed in 100 days, where 2 million people were implicated in the killing and left the country, so half the population had been involved with it. But the strangest of occurrences happened there. The victims of the genocide won the war. And they have mostly governed successfully, and they ended the genocide. So the victims of the genocide, their rebel forces that had scared the existing government and kept them, and had begun the genocide, they won. They have been the ruling party since 1994, when I worked there. They have the highest percentage of women in their legislature of any government on earth. So they have created a little bit of an economic miracle in the middle of Africa, and they still have governing problems. So the young general who took over, who led the triumph, has become president, and he has not found a way to stop being president. So there are challenges that we face, but nevertheless, I would put that in the. Despite the huge tragedy, local people found their way to a peaceful resolution, mainly by winning the war, which does not often happen. But it's also given them a great sense of independence. So even though they are what's called a donor darling, so countries that want to help tend to look at Rwanda as an opportunity to help. They still very much dictate how that help is going to be given, where it's going to go, what's going to be done, and I think that is a very healthy direction. We only have one daughter. She's 30. She probably stopped listening to us when she was maybe 4, 5, 6, 7. So we recognize how important it is if you really want a capable human being and a capable place that they make a lot of decisions themselves, even as you give advice and it's dismissed or occasionally listened to. And it's not that different for these countries. We shouldn't assume that because we're giving $50 million, $200 million, or in the case of Afghanistan where we were spending over $100 billion a year, that necessarily people are going to do what you tell them to do.
Okay. Who would be the American audience to be hearing about some of these positive results, like in Rwanda? Is it Congress? Is it the news media? How do we get these stories told?
Well, I think it really starts with all of you, because I still believe in our system fully. And I think that if we care, we often get our way. We almost always get our way, but you got to care. You can't. There are very few tourist visas in the democracy, so you got to be there every day. You got to make it known, and your elected officials need to know that you care about these things. We do have American soldiers in many of these places. The bases in over 120 countries. And there's a lot going on, And it's, and if we don't provide the guidance and the check and ask for better ideas and better solutions and better interventions or non-interventions, we're probably going to suffer. I used to say, I worked for the Agency for International Development, which is in Washington. It's called AID. And I used to say there were only a dozen or 24 members of Congress that could spell AID. So it's not as if that many people are that well informed about what we're doing. And these things really matter. I mean, again, America has every advantage. I was in the UN 2 different ways, as a US diplomat and as a senior international civil servant. And the United States has the premier position in that organization, as we do in almost every other organization on earth. Why? Because we were there to help build them, to design them, to negotiate them. We're a key funder, and there are a lot of things going on, but we need to care about how they operate and what they're doing. And so this kind of an audience, for me, especially with a mix of young people, and those of you who have retired as well, it's a wonderful example of how you can influence the system. Did that answer your question?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah. In your book, you talk about having traits of humility and optimism. Are these the right traits for today? Are they still relevant?
We should test it. We can do a survey. I happen to believe you probably wouldn't, whatever the survey came out, you wouldn't change my mind about either of these things, because I think that optimism is what fuels your feeling that you can come up with solutions to problems, no matter how hard they are. And one of the things that I try to say in the book is that we shouldn't be always looking to solve problems. We should oftentimes be catalytic, giving people of these countries a chance to make it on their own is a big time gift. And we don't have to take them to the shining city on the hill. We don't even complete that job in our own country as well as we'd like. So why should that be our attitude overseas? But optimism gives you that feeling of hopefulness, and that's something that when I work in these countries, I not only bring American optimism, but I try to restore that sense of trust and hope in the place. And humility, because these are really, really big undertakings, and many of them are conflicts that have been decades in the making, that have not been, that have been the result of 30 or 40 years of dictators, or disagreements that were being generated for centuries. At our table, we have a guest of Croatian background, and every time I got picked up in Zagreb, the capital of Croatia, the Croatian who worked for the U.S. government who picked me up, he would always give me a history lesson from the minute he picked me up till the minute he dropped me off. And finally, after about the third time he gave me this history lesson, and it always started in 1147. and so I would say to him, I'm an American. We don't go back that far. You're going to have to bring this into a more modern history for me to be able to appreciate it. I don't understand how you can be so aggravated for a millennium about this particular question. And he said, okay, you're right. Now, in 1272, so we've really got, we obviously have to understand that our role is marginal, no matter how central we may think we are. And our advice will be taken on occasion. We can sometimes fuel successes and ideas with limited amounts of funding, but we don't really want to take over anybody's problem. I'm sure all of you in this room have had somebody in your life come and ask you for advice. And if anybody in this room has had anybody who took your advice literally, and they took every bit of your advice, congratulations. Because I haven't had that experience in my life. And that's the way, so that kind of humility and modesty is absolutely essential, even as we know we have the advantaged position.
Does the rising tide of populism and the liberalism in the world create much greater challenges than in the past?
short answer is yes. It does. Because people have gotten more self-centered. And again, when all you're thinking about is yourself, you're unlikely to reach bigger solutions. And these are big, big problems. So, I mean, you can call it liberalism, whatever you want to call it, but the reality is that it does come down to caring for your neighbors. In most of the conflicts that I've worked in, people have turned on their neighbors. So the most drastic thing that can happen on earth is neighbor killing neighbor, in my mind. And it's incredibly personal. And this is obviously what happened in Rwanda, happened in Bosnia, happened less so in Haiti, where there wasn't that great societal murder and mass killing that you saw in these other places. But when you see it now in Syria, where 500,000 people have been killed, and 12 million people have left their homes, so this is really aggravated, and you have to at some point get beyond the mere survival which you're all pushed into, and begin to think about how you come together. And one of the things we did, just to give you a feeling for some of the solutions that are offered in the book, we would ask people, we'd have a limited amount, very small amount of money from the U.S. taxpayers. But in a place like Haiti, we would go into a village and we would say, we will help you do something if you can confirm the following behaviors. If you can show us that you have a community group that has come together to decide what action you want to take. 600 communities decided to build schools. Our contribution was under $3,000 per school. So that led to the second thing. Will you provide some labor or some other good that will make this happen? Will you account for the funds and anything that's happening in a very public way? We want to have a sign up on whatever the project is that says how much money has gone into this, so people can see that they got their money's worth. And other simple criteria. We were able to do over 1,000 projects of that sort, engaging literally hundreds of communities. And when a community wouldn't follow those rules, we would just say, thank you very much. It turns out there are other communities in Haiti that will. Because of course there were. And then they would look and say, well, we kind of like to have a well ourselves, or we'd like to have a school ourselves. We were not that interested in the schools or the wells or the irrigation project. What we were interested in was the governance experience. We wanted to see people come together and have to do things together. And if they did that, then we knew that their political system was going to be enriched by it. And we believed that the problem in Haiti was not the Haitians, but it was literally hundreds of years of exploitation and terrible, terrible governance. So you have to start at the minor league level. You have to have a AA team. You have to be able to bring the talent along, or you're not going to have a winning franchise at the top. And that's basically how we look at it.
Great, the Haiti examples are great. Thank you for that. In your book, you talk about how America should be thinking more as a venture capitalist, not a pension manager. How do you deploy this in peace building or stabilizing entities and countries?
So one thing that venture capitalists tend to do fairly well is they're there at the beginning, when the money is hardest to raise, when the risk is greatest. But they also accept the risk, which is the chances of success. As you said in my introduction, I've had many of opportunities to fail as well. So on the other hand, I had a boss, Doug Stafford, a wonderful, wonderful human being, who said, you guys are like the venture capitalists of the State Department and the US government. And if you succeed in 1 out of 10 cases, it will be such a phenomenal contribution. And so if you have a boss that says you're making it when you're making it 1 out of 10 or 2 out of 10, then you're comfortable with risk and you're able to lean into this. So I think of pension managers as I just spent $1, so then instead of having 100, I've only got 99 left. Whereas a venture capitalist puts $1 in and thinks, I now own 10% of some kind of an enterprise that might grow and could be a fantastic contributor. So that's the way I like to define it.
Okay. How do we measure progress on these interactions with other countries, or how should we be thinking about that and, of course, communicating that?
This is something we do very, very badly, and we almost always declare how well we're doing it. But it does start with independence. The evaluation has to be independent of the people that are running the program, and that is not our standard rule in the government. But I believe in these conflict places that the measuring of success should be looking at the people of the place and seeing if their lives are getting better. So that's a tougher model. We've tried polling in some places. It doesn't really work because the populations are in a state where polling doesn't really work. But I was able to, in the book describes a model that we started in Iraq and Afghanistan, where we almost, before there was big data, we developed a model that required us to we hired and trained a dozen local people. They went all over the country, irrespective of the conflict. They interviewed over 1,000 people. We did 250 leadership interviews of leaders of the country. We took every poll and focus group we could find that had taken place in the country. In Afghanistan early on, there were about 20 of those. We took newspaper stories from all over the world that quoted local people. So you always had a quote of somebody describing what they were going through. And then we took official reporting and we scrunched that all together to show what the trend lines were in the country, because we thought that would give you an indication of what was happening. So one example. We might look at this kind of a data point. We're talking to a mayor of a city in Afghanistan, and we say, what's it like to be the mayor here? And he or she would say, he usually would say, it's quite wonderful, I'm honored to be the mayor. And then we say, anything going on? He says, well, there have been 3 assassination attempts in the 6 months I've been mayor. Okay, so that's a conflicting data point. Democracy, very good. Assassination's not so good. And what we tried to do is to put this on a very simple, as the book describes it, a very simple XY grid, where that kind of an answer, we could show how it affected an individual's life and society in general on an XY scale. Now that's definitely not a plus answer. That's a plus minus answer, and you can see how an XY. And the reason we did that is that we wanted the policymakers in Washington to be able to understand what was happening in this war just as simply as they could hear that the stock market went up or down that day. We felt that that kind of visualization would help a busy policymaker say, what's this dangerous trend? And of course, what we got was very positive trends on health, care. We got an interesting one on women's position in the society. Women's individual standing improved, but their societal position did not improve very much. And so, again, I think not trying to believe that this is precise, but more a good indication of what's going on in the place.
Okay, I know in the book you talk about the government setting up multiple problem-solving organizations to go work on a problem, as opposed to one central force that might be addressing the problem. Talk to us a little bit about your concern about that and how that seems to be not a great solution.
Well, these are really complicated cases, and I believe that the way things get done in America generally is to have great teams, but to have somebody in charge whose career rises and falls on their ability to deliver the success. So you have to have a good team, but if you have crummy leadership, or if the leadership is all over the place, or if everybody goes back to their shop, to their leader, then you don't get the kind of integrated approach that you have to have in very complicated cases where people are killing each other. There are security interests, the water may not be working, the schools are open or not, and there's a lot of things that almost everything is disrupted. So in the US government, we do have one place where we have great clarity, surprising clarity, and that's in a country. When you're in the country, the US ambassador is the CEO. And in theory, that's a country team. And in theory, the ambassador is the most responsible party for the safety of all Americans, plus the programming and everything else. If you get a huge US military engagement in the country, the ambassador's authority is moderated considerably by the presence of multiple generals and other people of that sort. But to my way of thinking, in Washington, we don't have that. So what happens if you have a meeting at the National Security Council is you might have this kind of effect. The State Department, 15 seconds into the meeting, says, we'll take the notes and we'll write a paper and we'll get back to you. And it's sort of like, well, we haven't discussed anything yet. But okay, they've got the pen. And the Defense Department will say, very interesting conversation. We'll take it back to our building, that's the Pentagon, and we'll let you know what we think. It's like buying a car. I mean, who's in charge here? AID will say, oh, please don't take our money. We know we're the smallest, poorest, weakest bureaucracy here. But we do have money, so please don't pick our pockets. The CIA starts most of these meetings, and guess how they start out by saying, the place is going to hell. Because they can never be wrong if it's going in a very bad direction. But if they say that they're too optimistic. So these are all cultural and traditional roles that people are playing. And I believe that early in a crisis, you have to have 24/7 leadership. And it can come from any part of the government, and it should be the person who is best suited for that crisis. So if the crisis happens to be a tsunami hitting Japan and wiping out their nuclear power plants, that's a very different crisis than a famine in Africa or a war in Afghanistan. So just to confirm the weakness of our current model, would anybody here like to offer a guess as to who is running America's 17th year of war in Afghanistan? The military, but even within the military, you'd probably be hard pressed to say there is a commander on the ground, and each one keeps coming back with a new strategy as they arrive. In fact, for my class at Princeton this year, what I did is I took the exit interviews of 3 generals who were leaving Afghanistan, and their entry interviews, usually with a major news outlet, as they arrived in Afghanistan, and gave those to my class so they could see the differences in their takes as they were coming and going. As they were leaving, almost every general said, there must be a negotiated solution to this war. As they arrived, they said, I will spend the next 10 days talking to the troops and come up with a strategy of how we're going to knock them off their feet, the enemy off their feet. So I believe we have to have a single person in charge, has to be designated early in the crisis, and their career success should rise and fall on how well they do. In many cases, there are going to be people whose careers will be sacrificed because they've made very bad choices in these cases.
Absolutely. You recently wrote an op-ed for the Washington Post and called "This is what Trump should do about the migrant caravan." What did you advise him to do?
Well, first off, I did not write the headline. Because I'm not sure that this president would be listening to me at the top of his day. But I do believe that this is another one of these high violence situations where if we don't acknowledge the highest homicide rates in the world in Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala, they fluctuate. But they're there unless the only places they compare favorably to are war-torn countries. That level of violence that's taking place in Central America drives virtually everything. And I can tell you, as a visiting American diplomat, when I got there, I got very careful care as they moved me around the country and as we met with people, and I saw how torn those neighborhoods, the toughest neighborhoods, right in the capital, Tegucigalpa, were. So we have to acknowledge that, and if you acknowledge that, then you have to say, okay, what is causing that violence? And there are many, many, many causes, but today, gang violence happens to be one of the major causes. Now, many of those gangs learned their tricks in the United States, and that's an unfortunate export that we have some responsibility for. But I believed, and what this article said was that I thought one of the most promising avenues for making progress in Central America was the kind of gang truce that was negotiated by the Roman Catholic Church, in particular in the lead in El Salvador. And it took the homicide rate from over 15 people a day being killed down to under 5. And nobody thought it would stick, because who would expect that the leaders of two big gangs would be able to come to a negotiation? But with 10,000 of their members in prison and most of the leadership in prison in El Salvador, a negotiation was actually quite possible. And I believe that we should have encouraged that and found other ways of moving that forward, because there were still fears that while the homicide rate had dropped, which was our initial concern, that other forms of organized crime that they exerted in society continued, and those needed to be negotiated as well. Otherwise, you'd have fewer killings, but they would still have as much influence on the society as they had, and that wasn't going to work either. But that was just one idea that has been out there. It got play. It was locally owned, but we thought it was too risky to embrace. And I think if the United States had encouraged it, I think we could have made much more of it.
Great, thanks. You tell a powerful story in your book about a woman in West Africa, where you were working on refugee issues back in 1999. The woman had just given birth to triplets, but she came up to you to tell you something about one of her babies. What did she say to you?
Well, what she said was, and she was holding this little boy in her hand, she said, through the translator, I've named this my son Barton. Now, she didn't know me from anybody, right? But she knew that there was a high-level official who seemed to have an important job. And what I loved about this story was that a mother will do whatever they can to give her child a better chance in life. And that's about as universal a message as we'll ever find.
Yeah, it's a great honor.
I hope the child survived.
I hope he's out there. Okay, Saul, you have some questions from the audience?
We do. I'll just stay standing right here. Two related questions. How do you think the current administration's actions will affect global American influence going forward? And then, perhaps a bit more starkly, given the current administration striving to alienate us from our allies in the Western world, the future does not look promising. Is there any hope?
Well, you have to buy my book to get the hope. This is a difficult moment, and I do think that America alone is not a good model. I think, again, there's nothing like being the leader of the free world if people feel that you are the leader and they see you in that role. One thing that I would say to is that each administration, and some have more friends, more global friends than others by far, but each one does have some countries that seem to align itself with our current U.S. administration. So it's never a wash that everybody loves this president and nobody loves that president. It's just not that clean. But I do think that we probably have unnecessarily alienated a number of people, and I don't know how you work, but I work with friends.
Okay.
So,
Well, again, two related questions. Do you think we, the people, will ever be able to convince our government to spend more on foreign aid, such as helping to build schools, help provide the tools for clean water, and so forth, than on the military? And then, what are your thoughts on creating a new Marshall Plan in Central America? And you may have addressed this point somewhat, to stop the flood of refugees coming to the U.S., or should we build Trump's wall?
Well, I'm not a fan of the wall. I think it's a grotesque expenditure of public money that will not solve the problem and doesn't give us vital infrastructure. I do think we probably need at least, we have tens of billions of dollars of infrastructure needs in this country that I would put on a higher priority level. And prioritization is a big part of running anything. And the U.S. government falls in that category. I don't, the gap between what we spend on defense and on development and diplomacy is so huge that I can't imagine that there would ever be, I cannot imagine that there would ever be a rebalancing of those. I mean, I think we're at, what, about $900 billion a year in defense spending, something like that, and we're probably in the $60 billion or so range if you take everything that we do to